Good evening, afternoon, night, morning, whenever you find a way to watch or listen to this podcast. It is me, Omar Shan Borja, the Burger Popper here. And joining me is a friend of the podcast, Nathan Dailey, my Navy fan friend, or one of my Navy fan friends, hopefully trying to get him and Sam from the Blue and Gold Report going on here. But yeah, so Nathan's here. This week is a big week college football. It's not just the middle of September. The season's picking up, but it is the first week of Ivy League play where the Ivy League begins their season, of course. They only play 10 games, and they're beginning in week 4 because this year has 2 bye weeks. Due to there being, I think, 5 Saturdays in November. So very exciting to see these teams start off this week. There's some marquee matchups, but of course, we want to dive into the history of the league, our personal experiences with the Ivy League, as well as the allure and draw that they have in this changing landscape of college football that changed even more, which we'll talk about later on. So, Nathan, how's everything going?
It's going good, Omar. How about for yourself?
It is going great. So I'm excited to kind of spotlight the Ivy League, of course. In the past, I wouldn't say, geez, it's been 4 years, been doing this with Jackson. In the past 4 years, like more so three since the 2020 season did not have the Ivy League, but been showcasing the Ivy League here and there. This week, just talking about the first Friday night games of the year, which the first Friday night game will be at the end of the month, September 27th. But if you are a friend of this podcast, if you listen to this podcast, you are more than aware of my affinity for the Ivy League and Northeast college football as a whole, as you know that I lived in Massachusetts for 10 years. But yeah, Nathan. So I mean, the Ivy League. I guess where do you want to start a conversation with the Ancient Eight?
So, I don't follow the Ivy League like Omar does, but I just thought it'd be kind of, as a college football fan and just kind of a guy who just appreciates the history of college football. In a way, I've always found this league intriguing because if you really look at the history of the Ivy League and college football as a whole, I feel like the core foundation of college football, a lot of it seemed, really comes from the Ivy League. And, something I always find interesting too is that you know, this day and age, it's all about the SEC, and it's if you talk to like people that know the history of college football, I mean, back in the day, the Ivy League was the SEC of you know the early days of college football, which is always fascinating to me. But yeah, so I guess Omar, for me, I guess what I guess draws you to like the Ivy League. I mean, because obviously, like I think a lot of people don't probably follow the league super closely these days, just with how they've probably changed over time. But I guess what's drawn you to it? Like, what's made you such a big fan of the league as a whole?
So for me, from my experience, like growing up in the Northeast, my first exposure was non-conference games with my beloved Holy Cross Crusaders, which I grew up 10 minutes away from in Worcester, Massachusetts. As a kid, I want to say the second college football game that I ever saw was Yale at Holy Cross at Fitton Field. 2007, Mike McLeod ran for 256 yards, which I think is still a Yale single game record. But that was one of my first experiences. And of course, I also later on saw Harvard play at Fitton Field against Holy Cross, and I saw Brown play at Fitton Field. So the more I dove into those programs, the history, like these were the original Blue Bloods. Like if you look at the retroactive national championships that were selected by researchers and computer polls and everything after, I guess, when we started crowning national champions, a lot of the national champions go to the big three, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, which I think honestly is the most fierce of the rivalries in the Ivy League. A lot of people know about Harvard, Yale, but you had Princeton. Those three were the original blue bloods. And I think, and of course, you don't tell the story of college football without the Ivy League. The first football game occurring in I guess at Princeton with Princeton playing at Rutgers, excuse me. And then, of course, you have Walter Camp making rules, changing the game to make it resemble something more like what we have. I mean, the game of football today as well out there at Yale. Excuse me. And then, of course, like you have early in the days programs like Michigan, programs in the South, like your Georgias and everything. Their rite of passage was playing out east, beating an Ivy League team, and then you were a blue blood, then you were a national power, then you were in the eyes of the national media. So it's really hard to tell a story with college football without the Ivy League. And yes, in this day and age, they're less relevant per se to the casual fan, but even then, it's just watching them. It's like a trip back in time. Especially with the stadiums too. The stadiums are amazing. I think the problem, a lot of stadiums in Division One say that they're a certain age, but the thing is, it's like you look at the renovations and it's hardly the original structure. With a lot of the Ivy League stadiums, it's not that way. The original structure is mostly there intact, if not totally intact. And you can see the history. The history lives and breathes. So that's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that is my experience of why I love and how I was drawn to the Ivy League.
Yeah, no, that's it's really cool. And yeah, and that's honestly the like I said, I think that's an incredible thing about this league. It's just it's kind of become forgotten about in a way, but it's like I feel like there's got to be such. I feel like if you're a college football fan, you have like admiration and respect for this league because they really kind of were the ones that really helped lay a big foundation. I mean, like you said, I mean, Rutgers and Princeton, that was the first college football game ever. And I think wasn't it John Heisman the who was named at who they named the Heisman Trophy after? I think he went to Penn or was a coach there.
Yeah, exactly. So all that like traces of the game that we know, they live and breathe through the Ivy League. So definitely a league that's really important in this day and age. I know we want to talk about where they fit in today's landscape. So Nathan, I guess first off, where do you think that the Ivy League fits in today's landscape of college football? Everything changing so much.
Um, you know, in my opinion, I mean, obviously I don't know the league like you do, but as a fan, I feel like just with where college football is going and how more than ever it's becoming more and more of a business and about the money. I feel like for a lot of people that just love pure college football, I think it's going to be a draw to because these are, as far as I know, the Ivy League, there's no scholarships and it's still Division One football. And I mean, honestly, just from the little bit I see like on TV sometimes, it's still good football. I mean, I think I read something a while ago, like Princeton, like they've gotten some really good recruits over the years and even gotten like some highly rated guys that come there from like bigger like Division One programs. And I think people want to see like college football what it was truly supposed to be, like good students, guys that are playing for the love of the game. And I think you're going to get that with leagues like the Ivy League, and there's still like that regionality with it. You got great rivalries. Like I know Harvard Yale is a huge rivalry, and there's good athletes. I mean, I know guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick play in that league, Matt Burke. There's been a lot of solid guys coming out of that conference. So
Yeah, and I think for the Ivy League, I think in terms of an FCS league, like they're not the North Dakota States, uh, they're not the South Dakota States, they're not the national powers and everything. But the thing is, like they are still very relevant. People want to see these teams, and before the Missouri Valley Conference, before the NEC, even the MEAC and the SWAC, the Ivy League had their deal on ESPN, ESPN2. Like they were on TV in the 90s and ESPN after the Supreme Court ruled to like conferences negotiate their own TV contracts. The Ivy League was able to negotiate a contract with PBS. Then after that, ESPN got the package. So Ivy League football has always been in demand. That was like the first big change, first big shift in college football being about the money. That Supreme Court ruling in the 80s allowing conferences to negotiate. And I'm sure we're there at people are asking the same questions back then. Even now, I still think, like you said, there's still a desire to see a regionalized conferences rich with history, with natural rivalries, steeped in history, not manufactured rivalries manufactured by TV executives. And I think the Ivy League's gonna be just fine because it takes a specific athlete to go to the Ivy League. And like I said, there is great talent, but the Ivy League, in terms of it offers a lot to a high school recruit. Like you're on national TV once or twice a year on a weeknight with the Ivy League Friday night contract. It's not bad at all. It's not a bad deal at all. So I totally agree with you.
yeah, and as far as I know, too, with the Ivy League, I know they totally don't get to play in the FCS playoffs. I mean, do you think that's something that could change down the line?
I don't think so. I think they're pretty firm in their stance on that. But I will say that the FCS playoff arguers, they do have more valid points now since the Ivy League is playing their All-Star. They do have a yearly All-Star game in Japan now, which is hard to say that you care about the student athletes' academics when they're playing in Japan. I mean, bottom line in front is an Ivy League fan. Like it's hard for me to really argue against that. It's a very valid point.
Yeah, yeah, no, it would be, it would be cool. to see them have that opportunity. It's, when you're a competitor, it's like obviously everybody wants to compete for a championship, and it does stink for those guys that they don't get that. But obviously they chose to go to school there, so I guess they knew what they were signing up for. But I guess my other question would be too. I mean, do you think just with how the Ivy League is, do you think like in the FCS level, do you think they could legitimately compete for a national championship? Like, do you think they could beat a North Dakota State or a Montana or one of those blue bloods in the FCS?
I say because we've seen it before, I think the Ivy League can compete more with the Coastal Athletic Association. I think that's probably the peak that it gets. It's hard for them to compete with the Missouri Valley Football Conference because the Missouri Valley Football Conference recruits a different type of athlete and they play a different type of football, for being quite honest, very hard nosed type of football. It's essentially like the Big Ten of the FCS, right? Where you have very physical play, which I don't know if the Ivy League can stand up to. I mean, the Ivy League has not really been tested as much in non-conference aside from the Coastal Athletic Association. But other than that, they match up well with the Patriot League. They consistently beat the Northeast Conference. They've been consistently beating the MEAC. I know Howard played Yale a couple years ago, and Howard played Harvard a couple years ago as well. I think Morgan State played Yale last year too. So they've beaten the MEAC, but the MEAC, of course, does not play in the FCS playoffs either. So it's hard to measure much from that as well. So, I mean, I'm gonna say no. I'm saying I'm sure they can make a run, maybe like win a first round game, much like the Patriot League has done a couple years, like in a few years, like Colgate in 2018 beat James Madison in the first round. Um, so I can see them making a 1 or 2 game run like that, but that's about as far as it gets in my opinion.
Yeah, oh, makes sense. So
Yeah, I know you wanted to talk as well, really quick before we go on to our next topic. I guess our thoughts on Army and Navy. Starting off 2-0. Both teams have big games next week. Navy a little bit bigger than Army's. Navy playing Memphis at home at Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium. That is a series that is closer than anyone thinks, really. I mean, Navy always gives Memphis a great game, no matter how bad the team is. I remember in 2018, Memphis won the AAC West, and Navy still found a way to beat them, even though Navy went 3-10 that year. So always a great game with Navy and Memphis. And Army plays Rice, a team that matches up well with Army, to be honest, but has had a tough go of it. So I guess want to know your thoughts on both of our favorite teams having great starts to the season.
yeah, so honestly, I've been overall happy. I think this weekend coming up is really gonna show us where Navy's at. Just because, no disrespect to Temple or Bucknell, but they're not elite teams, and but I like what I've seen out of the offense. I think Drew Cronick's a heck of a play caller. I think Blake Horvath and Braxton Woodson, the football I've been able to watch so far this year, they've both looked solid, and the defense has been lights out. And I felt the first game, I feel like for me to feel confident about the year, I feel like they had to dominate against Bucknell, and they overall did that. I mean, the first drive of the game, they had a they had a blown coverage for a touchdown to start the game, but after that, they were just lights out, and I've been very happy, and even Army too. I've been very impressed with them. I think Bryson Dailey's looked awesome at quarterback for you guys, and I had an opportunity to watch some of that game against FAU last week, and I was impressed, man. You guys looked very physical, and I definitely I think both teams have a chance to have a really solid year. I don't know if they're good enough to make a run at winning the American, but I think they both have a chance to have good records and have a solid season and at least make a bowl game. So, and I'm which is good. And Air Force, who knows with them? I know they've had a rough go so far. So
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Air Force has definitely had a rough year. It's really hard. It's really hard to watch. And it's kind of weird. They've made bowls, I think, for 19, 21, 22, 23. So for the past 5 seasons, not counting the pandemic. So it's tough to see them do so difficult or do have such a hard time. But I have to say, I've been impressed with Bryson, or not Bryson, though, with Blake Horvath at quarterback. He showed bits of that electricity that Navy quarterbacks have been known for. Um, they have been known for, especially against Temple last week with that long run. Same thing with Teska and Heidenreich. They picked up where they left off last for the pass game. And for Army too, I'm just, they've played a classic triple option brand of football in 2 games. Keep away, bend but don't break defense, which was on display, full display against Florida Atlantic, which I don't know how good that bend but don't break defense is going to work against North Texas, but North Texas looks subdued this past weekend. Um, so I mean, I'm excited for us. I think with the American is in such a weak spot that both of our teams can at least make bowls and if not have special seasons. All right. All right. Had to edit a bit after having some family news, good family news for per se. But yeah, so I'm excited this year because I think Army and Navy could have special years. I think Navy can break their bowl drought. Both teams have a bowl drought. Army has not gone bowling since 2021, Navy since 2019, that magical Liberty Bowl season. And I think both teams could find themselves with good bowl matchups. Of course, Army is rumored to be tied into the Independence Bowl against a former Pac-12 member. And then I think Navy will probably go to the not Armed Forces Bowl, the Military Bowl on campus in Annapolis because they have not appeared in 6 years, and it's a great money making opportunity to have the midshipmen play a Power Five team. So
And it's a home game too. So
exactly,
no, I
exactly.
the thing I like, I when it comes to bowl games, I personally I like variety. Like I don't like to go to, I mean, unless you're going to the playoff and the national championship, I don't usually like to go to the same one. But in a way, the nice thing about the Military Bowl, I mean, we've been in it so many times, but it's always a good matchup. You get to play a Power Five opponent, so and I like that. So you get to test yourself against some of the best. So
Yeah, and I know for me, it's my dream to see Army play in a military bowl. Because as a kid, I think Army had 2 opportunities to go to the military bowl in 2009 and 2012. Neither year were they bowl eligible. 2009 they came close, but a missed field goal against Tulane prevented us from finishing 6-6, where we would have played Temple in a rematch in that one, a good old RFK Stadium, former home of the Washington Redskins, now Commanders. But that's a dream of mine. Of course, guarantees a Power Five team. And I mean, Navy and Army, they just have a lot of history against the ACC. So it's just a great matchup overall in
yeah,
that rivalry. Going on to the topic we wanted to cover, of course, the biggest news in right now in college football is the Pac-12 expanding 4 teams and adding 4 teams from the Mountain West to get to 6, and they are pending 2 more teams. I've heard a reliable source, not the most reliable source that I trust when it comes to realignment, say that the Pac-12 is looking at Tulane and Memphis, and I've heard other sources say that UNLV is one of the schools, but they can't separate themselves from Nevada Reno from the Nevada Wolfpack because of state legislation stuff. Um, so Nathan, what do you make of all this? And I guess what are your predictions for who rounds out the Pac-8?
I mean, I think like most people, it caught me off guard because the vibe I was getting is that maybe they would maybe eventually join the Mountain West or that they would join the Big 12 or the ACC. I mean, I guess nobody really knew what was going to happen, but um I like what they did. I mean, it would be cool to see them make this a regional conference. I mean, you got a bunch of West Coast schools and good programs too. I mean, people that really follow college football know like Fresno State, Colorado State, Boise. Those are all solid programs. I mean, especially Boise State. I mean, that I think this league has a lot of potential, and I think, um, I know like even Colorado State, they've built like a really nice new stadium a couple of years ago. A lot of those schools are really committed to football too, which is huge. And then, um, yeah, I'm excited to see what it turns out to be. I mean, I don't know if they'll ever get the power status, but I mean, heck, if you're even taking a bunch of like the best G5 teams, I mean, that could be a really good league. So
Yeah, I do agree. I think that there's value in being the best Group of Five league being because there's currently a vacuum right now with Cincinnati, Houston, UCF leaving the American. There's a vacuum in the Group of Five where there really is no clear top dog anymore. In fact, I
yeah,
mean, Army's in the American, Navy's in the American. I'll be bottom line up front, unbiased. The Americans looked like trash this year, really, compared to other Group Five leagues. The MAC is setting the world on fire. So there is a vacuum in the Group of Fives. I do think that the Pac-8 12, whatever they stop at is going to be a group of six league. I don't think that Washington State or Oregon State has been particularly great enough. I think over the past, I want to say 15 years. Honestly, if you look at the combined New Year's Six appearances between both schools in the last 15 years, in fact, since 2002, both schools have been to one New Year's Six game. I know Oregon State's had some close calls going to the Rose Bowl, which I wish that they had been able to go to in the late 2000s. But I think with that and Boise State makes it probably the best group of five league, along with Fresno State too. San Diego State's I think they're in a small rebuild. It's a small rebuild, but they have shown they can be a consistent winner under the right system. But they've been playing pro style ball for the past since Brady Hoke, honestly, past like 13 or so years, and they're transitioning to a Sean Lewis high tempo spread. But once they figure that out, San Diego State's gonna be good. So I
Yeah,
think you have a quality group of five league that can kind of take over that vacuum in the now group of six. Colorado State hasn't done much lately in football, but historically in the 90s and everything, like Sonny Lubick had those boys rolling.
yep.
Um, so yeah, as for the final two spots, it's anyone's guess, but I would hate for it to be Memphis and Tulane out of the American, honestly, but I think Memphis and Tulane with some of the additions of the American, I think they'd be inclined to get out of the American with some of the Conference USA additions. I'd hate to
Yeah.
point fingers and be point blank, but the American's not the same league it was after the fall of the Big East. And that's just that. I mean, it's still a great conference, but it's just not the
Yeah.
same league it was. So I can see
No, I
Memphis and Tulane leaving.
yeah, no, I agree with you. I still think it's a good conference. I think right now, I never thought I'd say it, and I've never thought it was a bad league, but the MAC right now is that might be the best group of five conference this year. I mean, I know last night Toledo they beat Mississippi State and they beat them pretty good. I didn't watch the game, but I saw the score. Miami of Ohio looks solid. I know they gave Northwestern a run for their money week one, and Bowling Green. I mean, they only lost by a touchdown to Penn State, and then obviously shout out to the NIU Huskies last week against Notre Dame. So that's looking like a really solid league this year. So
Yeah, and it looks like it's going to be more cyclic. Like the days of the American claiming from I think it was like 2017 all the way to 2022. So six straight New Year's Six appearances. I think those days are over. It's safe to say. New
yeah,
Year's Six slash playoff appearances days are over. And I think college football is better off as a result. But I do wish that the reward at the end was a New Year's Bowl because I am a purist and I love New Year's bowl games. I love bowl games. And honestly, too, I mean, I don't know if I've been on the record of saying, but I would much rather see Army play in a bowl game than a first round quarterfinal at someone's campus because the pageantry of bowl games, like it's just special, really. Um, call me crazy, but I'm going on the record saying that. But yeah,
yeah. Um, no, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with the Pac 8, the Pac 12 or 8 or whatever we're calling it right now. But I'm curious to see who they add. I mean, the team I think I'm shocked they didn't add it right away, which I know you talked about with the stuff with like Nevada or whatever, but is UNLV. I mean, I think that's a program on the rise. I mean, I know they had a really nice win the other night against Kansas, and that's a program that I think's booming. I mean, Barry Odom is probably one of the best, definitely one of the best coaches in college football right now. That offense they have, and they're a solid squad. And I mean, just the Las Vegas market as a whole. I mean, that's a booming market right now for media rights, and I mean that I would not be shocked if that's the team that comes in. But I could also see a USF. I could see Memphis. I could see Tulane. I mean, I guess it's just kind of wait and see. But I it would be cool to see it be a regional like West Coast conference, but I don't know if that'll happen. Just the nature of college football now. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens here coming up. And I am curious to see if if they do poach from the American, what happens to the American? I mean, if the American, who they would add, or what happens to the league. So
yeah. I mean, I can see the American adding just right off the bat. Western Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, those two schools that have been in Conference USA for a while. Even Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech can play good football. Once they have the right coach and everything. They had good runs in the 90s. they had a good run under Skip Holtz until they inexplicably fired him. So any one of the Conference USA schools that's been in that league for a while, I can totally see joining the American to replace those two. Or the American just stays pat at 12. So
Yeah,
all the members get more money. Like I think that's what everyone would like. Addition by
yeah,
subtraction or not doing anything. So I can definitely see that too. So yeah, I mean we'll just have to see how it plays out. But before we sign out, Nathan, is there anything final you'd like to discuss or add?
yeah. I guess what are your like? What's been the most like? Who's been kind of the biggest surprise to you so far this like for college football this season, just as a whole?
I think the biggest surprise for me, I would have to say, I mean, I pay more attention to the group of five, really. I think the biggest surprise for me has been, I want to say the top heaviness, or I guess, yeah, I guess the top heaviness or the lack of quality in the ACC. I think the biggest surprise has been Florida State. Really, I thought they'd be able to at least win a game. And I think with that, I think Cal and Boston College are probably the two biggest surprises for me. Where I think Cal looks like a legitimate contender in the ACC. They beat Auburn. They look like a team that could win the ACC. Excuse me, and make the playoff there. And then Boston College too. Like, yes, they lost to Missouri, but they had a really good showing against the Tigers, and of course, like that doesn't count against them winning the ACC. That's a team that could end the year 12-1, and of course, like Boston College, we played them last year, played them tough. But that's a tough, hard nosed team, and I think Bill O'Brien is more than the right guy to coach the Eagles out there.
No, I was gonna say too. I totally agree with you. I think BC's been a I wouldn't say a ultra huge surprise because they haven't. I mean, not that they've been elite, but I wouldn't say they've been terrible the last few years. But Bill O'Brien's definitely taken. I think he's taken to another level, and I know they got that really good quarterback. And I mean, I watched some of that game against Florida State, and they got a really physical offensive line, and it would be cool to see them make a run. Because I think Boston College is one of those programs. They've got a good tradition and history with football, and it'd be good to see somebody different. And I feel the same way about Florida State. I didn't expect them to be as good as last year, but I did not expect how they've started 0-3. I would have never expected that. And I still think Mike Norvell is a really good coach. And I hope he wouldn't get fired after this year if they don't have a great year because, I think he's still a solid guy, but, I guess we'll wait and see. But no, I've been surprised by them. And then also, too, I'm I gotta say Vanderbilt. Uh, I know they lost last night to Georgia State, but they look solid. And that the quarterback, that Diego Pavia or whatever his name is, he's a stud, man. I really like that guy.
Yeah, actually, Diego Pavia I played in his district, and I didn't play against him. I was a little bit later, but he was a little bit later on. But yeah, he's from that same district that I went to high school in, so a very hard nosed athlete that comes to that district. Out, I think in District 1, 6 AA, out there in New Mexico. But I think those are all valid points for sure. Vanderbilt as well. I mean, I think the Vanderbilt hype train's kind of stopped. I think Vanderbilt beating Virginia Tech in week 1 is more Virginia Tech and the ACC not being great. But it's still good to see Vanderbilt get a non-conference win against Power Five. So we'll see how these teams fare the rest of the year. Is there anything else, Nathan, that you would like to add before we sign off?
Um, yeah, I guess wouldn't mind kind of hearing your thoughts too. I know last week that you were at the FAU Army game. I was just kind of wondering your thoughts on your experience at the stadium, what you thought of it, and just as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Many great people at FAU, many friendly fans. We hung out at FAU tailgate. We got intercepted, my wife and I, but just great fans. Hot stadium though. I think that's a problem with a lot of the stadiums in Florida is they're in Florida and there isn't much to do for shade. There isn't much shade there. So it was a particularly hot day with a noon kickoff. But overall, I think it's a great stadium. I think it's a nice stadium for an AAC team. Great to see Army playing in a fun city. Boca Raton's a great city to be in. Really, really nice to see. Really great beaches. Downtown is a fun spot to be at. So I had a great experience. I recommend every AAC fan, 13 plays FAU, and they have the means to do so to make a trip to Boca Raton. So
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a. It looks like it'd be a fun stadium, and I think that's one of those programs too that I think I like Tom Herman. I think he's got if he's given the time, I think can make them a solid contender in the AAC. And they seem like a program that's committed to having a solid football program with their stadium they built a few years ago and other things they've done. But no, that's awesome to hear. And yeah, definitely as a Navy fan, guy, a fan of a team that's in the American, it's definitely would be a stadium on my list of ones to go to. So
Yeah, absolutely. Highly recommend, just a great place to have fun and relax. Just not in the summer. Hopefully you go in November when the temperatures are more manageable. But everyone, thanks for listening. Nathan, thank you again for joining. It's always a pleasure having you on, discussing these topics with you. Hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. And for everyone listening, again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Till next time, everyone, peace, love, and soul, and the Burger Popper.